The storm Clara had been carefully crafting finally began to break. Whispers that once mocked her now spoke her name with caution, even respect. At luncheons and galas, she was no longer the placeholder wife but the woman Adrian Cross can't control. It was a title she wore like armor. She had the supplier contract secured, the ears of key shareholders, and allies quietly gathering behind her. But this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about power. Her first strike came quietly. Clara arranged a meeting at a private club where no cameras intruded. Eleanor Grant, Thomas Grayson, and Victor Lane sat across from her, their faces sharp with anticipation. Clara laid out her plan with poise. Adrian's arrogance is his weakness, she said, her voice steady, her eyes gleaming. He refuses to acknowledge me, yet he can't stay away. That distraction leaves cracks in his empire. We widen them, we take advantage, and when the time comes, we strike together. Eleanor smirked, raising her glass. I never thought I'd see the day the cross name trembled at a woman's hand. You're a dangerous ally, Clara. Clara's lips curved faintly. No. I'm a necessary one. But Adrian was no fool. He felt the shifting tides, the subtle resistance in board meetings, the sudden appearance of Clara's name whispered by men who should have been loyal only to him. His fury burned, but beneath it lay something more dangerous, desire tangled with obsession. He hated her defiance even as it pulled him closer. That night, he summoned her to the villa, sending his driver with a message, "Come. Now." Clara almost laughed when she read it. She went, not as the obedient wife she once was, but as the woman who had clawed her way into strength. When she entered his study, Adrian was waiting, sleeves rolled up, his tie discarded, his glass of whiskey untouched. His dark eyes locked onto hers, smoldering with equal parts rage and hunger. "You've been busy," he said, his voice low and rough. Clara didn't flinch. "And you've been careless." His jaw tightened, his fists clenching on the desk. "You think you can play in my world?" She stepped closer, her heels clicking against the floor, her gaze unwavering. "Not think, Adrian. I am." In 2 strides, he was in front of her, his hand gripping her wrist, dragging her flush against his chest. His breath was hot at her ear, his control fraying. "I should destroy you for this," he rasped. Clara's pulse thundered, her body betraying her with heat, but she forced herself to smirk. "But you won't. Because the more you try to break me, the more you crave me." His grip tightened, his lips brushing dangerously close to hers, his voice a growl. "You'll burn, Clara." She leaned in, her eyes locked on his, her voice a whisper of steel. "Then let's burn together." She tore free and strode out of the study, leaving Adrian standing in the shadows, chest heaving, his hunger consuming him. For the first time, Adrian Cross realized the empire he built wasn't under attack by rivals or enemies. It was being dismantled piece by the very woman he once dismissed as nothing. And she wasn't done yet. The power shift had begun. Clara's defiance at the villa was only the beginning. The following morning, she appeared at a high-profile business breakfast hosted by Hovendale's Chamber of Commerce. It was the kind of event Adrian dominated, a gathering where he was hailed as the city's prodigy. But this time, Clara walked in with Eleanor Grant at her side, both women commanding attention in their tailored suits. Whispers rippled instantly, what was Adrian's estranged wife doing here, and why was she aligned with one of the crossboard's most outspoken members? Adrian was already seated at the head of the long table when Clara entered. His eyes locked onto her like a blade. Bella, perched beside him, stiffened, her smile cracking at the sight. Clara met Adrian's gaze boldly, her crimson lips curving faintly, then took a seat opposite him, her every movement deliberate. The message was clear, she wasn't here as his wife. She was here as his rival. During the breakfast, Adrian spoke with his usual cold authority about expansion plans and market dominance, but when Eleanor prompted Clara to share her views, the room shifted. Clara spoke calmly, her words precise, her tone edged with steel. She criticized inefficiencies in cross-corporation, pointing out vulnerabilities that Adrian had dismissed for years. The room listened, really listened. Adrian's jaw tightened, his hand clenching around his coffee cup, but he said nothing. To interrupt her would have been to admit she mattered. When she finished, the applause was polite but genuine. Adrian's silence was louder than any rebuttal. After the meeting, Adrian cornered her in the empty corridor. He pressed her against the wall before she could step outside, his eyes burning with fury and something far more dangerous. "You humiliated me in front of them," he growled, his voice ragged. Clara's breath caught, but she forced herself to smirk, her words sharp. "No, Adrian. You humiliated yourself by underestimating me." His hand slid to her waist, gripping tightly, his face hovering inches from hers. "You think this makes you powerful?" he rasped. "All it makes you is mine, whether you admit it or not." Her pulse thundered, her body betraying her again with heat that pooled low in her belly. For a second, she wanted to surrender, to drown in the fire he ignited every time he touched her. But she steadied herself, her voice steady despite her trembling. "If I'm yours, then why are you the one chasing me?" His eyes darkened further, his control snapping. He leaned closer, his lips almost brushing hers, and for a moment Clara thought he would claim her right there in the corridor. But then she twisted her wrist free, her nails digging into his chest as she shoved him back. "Careful, Adrian. The more you chase, the more you show them all that I've already won." She turned on her heel and strode away, her heels echoing like gunfire. Adrian remained in the shadows, his chest heaving, his fists clenched. He had spent his life crushing rivals, bending men twice his age to his will. But Clara wasn't bending. She was rising. And worse, he couldn't decide if he wanted to destroy her, or surrender to her completely. By the end of the week, Clara's defiance had become the city's favorite story. At cafes and salons, her name was spoken with awe. She stood up to Adrian Cross and lived to tell the tale. Shareholders who had once bowed to Adrian now began seeking Clara's counsel, quietly, carefully, but enough for Adrian to notice. His empire wasn't crumbling yet, but cracks had appeared, hairline fractures spreading beneath his control. Adrian hated it. He hated her power, hated her defiance, hated the way every man in the room looked at her as though she were something untouchable. And yet, he wanted her with a hunger that consumed him. Clara, meanwhile, used every opportunity to solidify her footing. She hosted a private dinner at Eleanor Grant's residence, inviting a handful of shareholders and investors Adrian had ignored. The evening was elegant but calculated. Clara spoke sparingly, letting others talk while she steered the conversation like a conductor leading an orchestra. By the end of the night, she had secured not just respect, but loyalty. Thomas Grayson, watching her with a glimmer of admiration, murmured, "You've done more in a month than Adrian has in years." Clara only smiled faintly, sipping her wine. "Then imagine what I'll do in a year." But Adrian refused to let her victory stand uncontested. At a glittering gala hosted by the mayor, he cornered her once again. She was radiant in a gown of emerald silk, her shoulders bare, her laughter drawing eyes across the room. Adrian couldn't stand it. He intercepted her as she moved through the crowd, his hand wrapping around her wrist with quiet force. "Dance with me," he demanded. Clara arched a brow, her smile sharp. "Or what? You'll throw a tantrum in front of your adoring public?" He pulled her onto the dance floor before she could resist, his arm locking around her waist, his grip iron. The orchestra swelled, and they moved together, their bodies pressed close, the heat between them impossible to ignore. "You're playing a dangerous game," Adrian murmured against her ear, his breath hot, his voice low enough for only her to hear. Clara's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to smirk. "So are you. And you're losing." His hand slid lower on her back, his hold possessive, his movements more a claim than a dance. "You think these people respect you?" he rasped. "They only follow you because you've provoked me. When I decide to end it, they'll scatter." Clara met his dark gaze, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. "Then end it, Adrian. But we both know you won't." Because you need me more than you want to admit. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of them, their eyes locked, their bodies pressed, their lips hovering dangerously close. Clara's heart thundered, torn between fury and longing, but at the last second she leaned back, breaking the spell. The music ended, applause rippling through the hall, but Clara slipped from his grasp, her gown swirling like fire as she walked away. Adrian stood frozen, his fists clenched, his chest heaving. He had danced with countless women, held countless partners, but never had one walked away from him with her head held high. As Clara disappeared into the crowd, whispers followed her like shadows. Adrian Cross had finally met his match. And she was his wife. The whispers from the gala only grew louder in the following days. Clara's dance with Adrian was replayed endlessly on society blogs, every photograph dissected for meaning. Some claimed it was proof the marriage was rekindling, others insisted it was a battle of wills disguised as intimacy. Clara didn't correct them. Let the world speculate. Uncertainty was a weapon, and she wielded it with precision. Meanwhile, Bella's humiliation deepened. Once adored, she now found herself compared unfavorably to Clara in every column. Her temper turned violent, and servants whispered of broken mirrors and shredded gowns. She went to Adrian, demanding reassurance, but he gave her nothing. His silence was crueler than words, and Bella began to realize that the pedestal she thought she stood on was crumbling beneath her. Clara, however, focused on consolidating her gains. She arranged a quiet meeting with Victor Lane, Eleanor Grant, and Thomas Grayson in a penthouse suite overlooking the city. There, they discussed the strategy to pressure Cross Corporation. Clara listened more than she spoke, her presence commanding without effort. When Victor asked if she intended to confront Adrian directly, she leaned back in her chair, her crimson lips curving. I don't need to confront him. I just need to be everywhere he isn't expecting me. Her allies exchanged looks of intrigue and respect. Clara was no longer seen as a pawn. She was a player. But Adrian was not a man who tolerated being played. That night, he appeared at her hotel once again, his patience shredded thin. Clara was on the balcony when he arrived, the city lights glittering like jewels beneath her. He approached her without a word, his footsteps heavy, his presence overwhelming. She turned slowly, her eyes cool, but the moment she met his gaze, her heart stumbled. His tie was undone, his shirt collar open, his dark eyes blazing with something untamed. Do you enjoy humiliating me? He asked, his voice low, rough, almost hoarse. Clara didn't flinch. I enjoy watching you lose control. In 2 strides, he had her pinned against the balcony rail, his body pressing into hers, his breath hot on her skin. You think you're winning? He growled, his hand sliding along her hip, gripping with punishing force. You've turned me into a man I don't recognize. I should hate you for it. But all I want is to have you until you can't breathe without me. Clara's pulse thundered, her body betraying her with a rush of heat that made her knees weak. For a moment, she almost surrendered, almost let herself drown in the fire that burned between them. But then she remembered Bella's triumphant smirk, her parents' cruel laughter, the years she spent invisible. Her fury burned hotter than desire. She seized his wrist, twisting free with sudden strength, her voice sharp as steel. You don't get to want me now. You had me when I begged for scraps of your affection, and you threw me away. Now you'll crawl, Adrian. And when you do, I'll decide if you're worth saving. She shoved him back and swept inside, her gown swirling around her like a banner of war. Adrian remained on the balcony, his chest heaving, his control in tatters. He had conquered empires, crushed rivals, bent the world to his will, but in Clara's hands he was unraveling, thread by thread. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Cross wasn't sure if he wanted to stop it. Clara's words haunted Adrian long after she vanished into the hotel suite. Now you'll crawl. No one had ever spoken to him that way. No one had dared. And yet the memory of her defiance, the fire in her eyes, made his blood burn hotter than rage alone. He returned to the villa in silence, Bella waiting for him in a crimson nightgown, her perfume heavy in the air. She pressed herself against him, desperate, clawing for his attention. But when he closed his eyes, it wasn't Bella he saw. It was Clara's smirk, Clara's voice, Clara's body trembling yet unbroken beneath his hands. He pushed Bella away with a single motion. She stumbled, humiliated, but he didn't even look at her as he walked upstairs alone. Meanwhile, Clara deepened her web. Thomas Grayson delivered to her a folder of documents exposing Adrian's mismanagement of a lucrative overseas project. Clara read each page carefully, her lips curving with satisfaction. "This is enough to shake his empire," Thomas murmured. Clara shook her head. "Not yet. Timing is everything. We let the cracks show when the audience is largest." She closed the folder with deliberate calm. "And I will choose that stage." Her moment came sooner than expected. Cross Corporation announced a press conference to unveil a new investment initiative, one Adrian himself would present. The event promised to be a spectacle, reporters swarming like vultures. Clara attended, uninvited but impossible to ignore, walking into the conference hall in a sleek ivory suit that commanded attention. Cameras turned instantly, flashes sparking as reporters murmured. Bella, seated in the front row beside Adrian, stiffened visibly when Clara took a seat a few rows behind, her presence electric. Adrian delivered his speech with his usual composure, but his eyes flicked to Clara again and again, his words sharper, his posture taut. He ended with thunderous applause, but as the crowd rose, Clara made her move. She stood, clapping slowly, her eyes locked on Adrian's. The room fell silent, all eyes shifting between the two of them. Clara smiled faintly, her voice ringing out. "An impressive vision, Adrian. But can an empire built on cracks stand tall?" Gasps rippled through the hall, reporters scribbling furiously. Adrian's jaw tightened, his eyes dark as night, but he said nothing. To acknowledge her would give her power. To ignore her made him look weak. Either way, Clara had won. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, Adrian caught her in the corridor, fury radiating from him like heat. He slammed her against the wall, his hand braced beside her head, his chest crushing into hers. "You're playing with fire," he growled, his voice raw. Clara tilted her head, her smirk taunting despite her racing pulse. "No, Adrian. I am the fire." His breath hitched, his eyes burning with hunger as his hand slid down her arm, his grip possessive. "I should silence you right here," he rasped, his lips brushing her ear. Clara's body trembled, desire sparking traitorously through her veins, but she steadied her voice. "Then kiss me, Adrian. Kiss me and prove to the world that I still own you." For a long moment, he hovered there, his control fraying, his mouth inches from hers. His chest heaved, his breath ragged. But at the last second, he tore himself away, slamming his fist into the wall instead, the marble cracking beneath his knuckles. Clara watched him with cold satisfaction, her body still burning, her heart still racing. She had denied him again, and his restraint was unraveling. As Adrian stalked away, blood dripping from his hand, Clara whispered to herself, her eyes glinting. "The empire isn't his anymore. It's mine." The footage from the press conference spread like wildfire. Clips of Clara's slow, deliberate clap and her sharp question dominated every news cycle, replayed on television and dissected across gossip blogs. The public reveled in it, a dethroned wife challenging Hovendale's most untouchable man. Some called her reckless, others called her brave, but no one dismissed her anymore. Bella, however, could not endure the humiliation. She smashed a mirror in her dressing room when she saw the coverage, her reflection fracturing into shards. Adrian had once been her stage, her pedestal, but now Clara had stolen the spotlight completely. She rushed to Adrian, her voice shrill. "She's destroying you. Why do you let her? Why don't you crush her once and for all?" Adrian's gaze was cold, his jaw tense. "Because I can't," he muttered, almost to himself, but Bella heard. The admission shattered what little pride she had left. Clara, meanwhile, tightened her hold on the strings she'd been pulling. Victor Lane secured her a private dinner with two journalists who had influence over the business press. She handed them carefully selected documents from the folder Thomas Grayson had given her, small cracks, enough to cast doubt without revealing her full hand. By the next morning, the headlines questioned Adrian's competence for the first time. Cross corporations overseas gamble, bold or reckless? Clara smiled at the article, sipping her tea as though it were nothing more than morning entertainment. Every headline was a dagger, and she was twisting them deeper. But Adrian refused to be a silent victim. That evening, he appeared at her hotel again, his presence filling the suite like a storm. He didn't knock, didn't speak at first, only stood at the doorway, his shirt undone at the collar, his eyes shadowed with fury and obsession. Clara set down her teacup slowly, her heart thundering though her face remained calm. "Another uninvited visit," she said coolly. "Should I change the locks?" Adrian crossed the room in 3 strides, his hand slamming onto the table beside her, rattling the china. "You think you've won because you've stirred whispers? You think contracts and rumors will bring me to my knees?" Clara met his gaze without flinching. "Not yet. But it's a start." In a blur, he seized her wrist and yanked her to her feet, his chest colliding with hers, his breath scorching. "You're driving me insane," he growled, his lips hovering dangerously close. "I can't work, I can't sleep, I can't breathe without wanting you." Clara's pulse raced, her body betraying her with a rush of heat, but she steadied her voice. "Good. Now you understand what it means to lose control." His hand slid to her waist, gripping her possessively, his restraint snapping. He crushed his mouth to hers, a fierce, bruising kiss that tasted of fury and hunger. Clara gasped, her hands pressing against his chest, but instead of pushing, her body arched into him, fire consuming her resolve. The kiss deepened, his hands roaming, his dominance overwhelming. For a moment, Clara drowned in it, her hatred tangled with desperate longing, every nerve screaming for more. But then clarity struck like ice. She tore herself free, breathless, her lips swollen, her voice trembling with rage. "You don't get to claim me now, Adrian. Not after everything." He stood frozen, his chest heaving, his fists clenched as though holding himself back from seizing her again. His voice was hoarse, ragged. "You can lie to yourself all you want. But you'll never escape me." Clara wiped her lips with the back of her hand, her eyes sharp as steel. "I already have. And soon, the whole world will see it." She turned her back on him, her shoulders straight, her defiance radiating. Adrian remained rooted in the shadows of her suite, his body burning, his soul unraveling. He had conquered markets and rivals without blinking, but Clara, his wife, his enemy, his obsession, was dismantling him piece by piece. And the worst part was, he couldn't decide if he wanted to destroy her, or surrender completely. The city buzzed with rumors after Adrian's late-night visit to Clara's hotel. Staff whispered about raised voices, a broken glass, and the sound of heels storming across marble. No photographs surfaced, but the speculation was enough. Everyone knew Adrian was chasing Clara, not the other way around. The power shift was no longer subtle. It was visible, tangible, undeniable. Clara capitalized on it immediately. She arranged a charity gala in her own name, hosted at the Grand Pavilion, a venue previously monopolized by the Cross family. Invitations were delivered in gold-embossed envelopes, and nearly every socialite, investor, and dignitary in Hovendale attended, not for the cause, but for Clara. She arrived in a gown of white silk that clung to her form, a vision of purity wrapped around steel. The cameras flashed wildly as she stepped onto the red carpet, her smile poised, her every gesture calculated. "Clara Cross, the woman who defied the empire," the reporters whispered. Inside, the gala unfolded like a coronation. Clara moved through the crowd with effortless grace, her laughter light, her conversation sharp. Eleanor Grant toasted her publicly, praising her resilience and vision, while Victor Lane murmured to investors that Clara was the future. Even Thomas Grayson, once a bitter cast-off, spoke of her with reverence. The night was hers. But Adrian arrived anyway. He appeared near midnight, dressed in a tailored black suit that made him look like the very shadow of the empire he carried. The room hushed at his presence. He didn't smile, didn't greet anyone, his eyes sought only Clara. When he finally approached, the crowd instinctively parted, whispers swelling like a tide. Adrian stopped in front of her, his gaze dark, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "You think you can replace me?" Clara tilted her chin, her smile faint but sharp. "Not replace. Surpass." Before he could respond, Victor Lane approached with a glass of champagne, standing protectively at Clara's side. "Clara," he said smoothly, "the investors are waiting for your speech." Adrian's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to Victor like a predator sizing up prey. Clara only smiled, slipping her arm through Victor's as she walked toward the stage. Adrian remained rooted, his fists clenched, his composure fraying as he watched her take the microphone. Clara spoke with elegance, her voice carrying across the gilded hall. She spoke not of herself, but of resilience, of rising from shadows, of reclaiming power when the world insists you are nothing. The audience hung on every word, their applause thunderous when she finished. And as Clara stood there, radiant under the chandeliers, Adrian realized with a sickening, intoxicating twist in his gut that the empire he had spent his life building was no longer his stage. It was hers. Yet even as applause rang, Clara's heart pounded wildly. She felt Adrian's stare burning into her back, a tether of obsession she could not cut. The war between them was far from over, but tonight, for the first time, she was the one standing on the throne. The morning after the gala, every headline belonged to Clara. The rise of Clara Cross. From forgotten wife to Queen of Hovendale. Photographs of her in the white silk gown flooded the feeds, her poised smile compared to Adrian's stormy scowl in the background. The contrast was intoxicating for the public, she was the light, he the shadow, and together they were the drama no one could look away from. Bella, however, couldn't bear it. She locked herself in her villa suite, shrieking at reporters through the gates. The once beloved Red Swan of Hovendale had become a laughingstock, and Clara had done nothing but exist to make it so. But Adrian wasn't laughing. He spent the day in his office, glass after glass of whiskey untouched beside him, staring at the photos of Clara on his screen. She had slipped out of his grasp, stolen his spotlight, and yet all he could think about was how badly he wanted her, how desperately he needed to pin her against a wall and taste her defiance until she broke. His mind warred with itself, the ruthless businessman screaming to destroy her, the man beneath burning to possess her. By dusk, obsession won. He drove to her hotel, unannounced as always. Clara was in her suite, still in her slip from the night before, her hair tumbling loose, when the door slammed open. She didn't startle. She had known he would come. Adrian's eyes darkened instantly, raking over her, hunger raw in his gaze. "Do you enjoy humiliating me?" he rasped. Clara tilted her head, her lips curving faintly. "More than you'll ever admit." His chest heaved, and in 2 strides he was on her, his hands gripping her waist, lifting her effortlessly onto the desk by the window. Papers scattered as he pressed himself between her thighs, his mouth hovering a breath from hers. "I should ruin you," he growled, his voice rough. "But all I can think about is how much I need you." Clara's pulse thundered, her body trembling as heat surged through her. His hand slid up her thigh, fingers digging possessively into her skin, his breath scorching her lips. For a moment, she nearly gave in, nearly drowned in the fire of his hunger. But then she seized his wrist, her nails biting into his flesh, her voice sharp though it trembled. "You want me on your knees, Adrian? Then crawl first." The words hit him like a strike. His jaw clenched, his body rigid, but his eyes, God, his eyes burned hotter. Adrian tore his hand free and stepped back, his restraint fraying so badly the veins in his neck bulged. He slammed his fist into the desk beside her, wood splintering, his breath ragged. "Careful, Clara," he hissed. "You'll push me past the point of no return." Clara slid down gracefully, her slip brushing against his suit as she moved past him, her perfume lingering. She whispered without looking back, "That's exactly what I want." Adrian stood frozen, his body shaking, his control shattered. He had never been closer to destruction, and he had never wanted it more. The desk still bore the crack of Adrian's fist when Clara left her suite that morning, her heels clicking like war drums down the hotel corridor. She felt his stare even after she closed the door behind her, the weight of his obsession clinging to her skin like smoke. She hated how her body still ached from his touch, how the ghost of his breath on her lips haunted her every step. But she reminded herself of the larger war. This wasn't about stolen kisses or sleepless nights. This was about power. And she was winning. By midday, Clara attended a luncheon hosted by Eleanor Grant, where several major shareholders gathered in private. She walked into the dining hall radiant in sapphire silk, every eye turning to her with a mix of curiosity and respect. Eleanor introduced her not as Mrs. Cross but as Clara, the woman who sees what others miss. Clara seized the moment, standing to speak. She outlined Adrian's failures, stalled projects, fractured alliances, ignored warnings. Her tone was calm, her words precise, each one landing like a blade. By the time she finished, the room buzzed with agreement. These men and women had once feared Adrian Cross. Now they considered the possibility of following Clara instead. News of the luncheon reached Adrian within hours. He stormed into a board meeting that afternoon, his presence like thunderclouds. When one executive dared to mention Clara's name, Adrian silenced him with a glare so cold it froze the room. But fury alone couldn't erase what was happening. Adrian could feel it, his grip slipping, his empire trembling beneath his feet. And Clara was the reason. That night, Adrian returned to her hotel again, this time without pretense of control. He entered her suite like a storm, his tie loosened, his eyes wild. Clara stood at the window, wine glass in hand, her expression unreadable. "You're predictable," she said softly. "I knew you'd come crawling back." Adrian crossed the room in seconds, seizing her glass and shattering it against the wall. He grabbed her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You think you're untouchable," he rasped, his voice hoarse with hunger and fury. "But I've never wanted anything the way I want you." His mouth crashed onto hers, fierce and bruising, his hands tangling in her hair as though he'd die if he let go. Clara gasped, her body igniting, her blood rushing with forbidden fire. For a moment, she surrendered, kissing him back with equal ferocity, her nails clawing at his shoulders. The desk, the wall, the very air between them crackled with heat. But just as quickly, clarity returned. She shoved him back, breathless, her lips swollen, her voice sharp enough to cut. "This isn't love, Adrian. It's obsession. And obsession is weakness." Adrian's chest heaved, his fists trembling at his sides, his eyes blazing with something darker than desire. "Then I'll be weak for you," he growled. Clara froze, the raw confession unraveling something deep inside her. She forced herself to steady, to smirk. "Good. Because weakness is exactly how I'll destroy you." She swept past him, her gown brushing against his body, leaving him standing alone in the shattered silence, his soul unraveling thread by thread. For the first time in his life, Adrian Cross was not the hunter. He was the prey, and Clara was tightening the net. The city woke to headlines that no one could have imagined a month ago. Clara Cross gains quiet backing of shareholders. The article was careful, vague, but the implication was undeniable. Adrian's estranged wife was no longer a discarded shadow. She was a contender. Every board member who saw it felt the tremor, every rival company smelled blood in the water, and Bella screamed until her voice broke, smashing another mirror in her suite as servants shrank against the walls. Adrian said nothing to her rage. He barely saw her anymore. His mind was consumed by one name, one face, one woman who refused to bend. Clara read the article over breakfast, her lips curving faintly as she stirred her coffee. She had expected Adrian to retaliate swiftly, to crush the whispers before they grew louder. Instead, the silence from his side only amplified her power. But she knew silence didn't mean surrender. Adrian Cross was too controlled, too ruthless. Silence meant he was plotting. She needed to be ready. That evening, she attended a private art showing hosted by one of Eleanor's allies. The gallery buzzed with elite chatter, crystal glasses clinking, oil paintings gleaming under soft light. Clara moved through the room in a gown of black velvet, sleek and dangerous as midnight itself. Men turned to stare, women whispered behind their fans, but Clara paid them no mind. Her allies were here. So was opportunity. And so was Adrian. He appeared without warning, taller than the crowd, dressed in a dark suit that made him look like the embodiment of shadow. The moment he stepped in, the room shifted. Conversations faltered, eyes flicked nervously. Everyone knew there was war between the crosses, and now both stood under the same roof. Clara didn't flinch when his gaze locked onto hers, dark and smoldering. Instead, she lifted her glass in the faintest of toasts, daring him to cross the room. He did. "Enjoying yourself?" he asked, his voice low, his presence overwhelming as he stopped in front of her. Clara's lips curved. "Immensely. It's liberating to be the one in control." His jaw tightened, his hand twitching as though resisting the urge to seize her. "You think control will save you?" he rasped. "Control is an illusion." Clara leaned closer, her breath brushing his cheek, her voice like silk wrapped around steel. "Then watch me turn illusion into reality." He grabbed her wrist suddenly, pulling her into a shadowed alcove away from the crowd. His body pressed against hers, pinning her to the wall, his eyes blazing with desperation. "You're unraveling me, Clara," he growled. "I can't fight you. I don't even want to. But I won't let you destroy me." His lips hovered dangerously close, his breath hot, his voice fraying. "Tell me you don't want this. Tell me you don't want me." Clara's heart thundered, her body trembling with forbidden heat, every nerve screaming to surrender. But she steadied herself, meeting his burning gaze with defiance. "I don't want you, Adrian. I want your downfall." She shoved him back, her velvet gown sweeping as she walked away, leaving him rooted in the shadows, fists clenched, chest heaving. And as Adrian stood there, his empire slipping, his obsession consuming him, he realized with bone-deep certainty, the power had already shifted. And Clara was no longer his wife. She was his reckoning.